I would like to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar session on applying research to school improvement. This is a third in a series of webinars that we've given on school improvement. I'd like to welcome back our speakers, Scott Bauer and David Brazer, two professors with George Mason University. They've been very helpful in leading this discussion on school improvement. And they're taking concepts that are very important for school leaders from their book called Using Research to Lead School Improvement, which is a SAGE publication. I'll be happy to put that as a resource. But I do encourage everybody that if you have time and you're interested in delving deeper into this topic, that you do maybe look at their book and look at these sections on it. So with that, I would like to introduce Scott and David and turn the show over to you.
Good afternoon. This is Scott Bauer with my colleague David Brazer, as Honor said. In our previous sessions, we discussed problem finding, articulating instructional problems based on analysis of student performance data, and then the importance of finding root causes of problems before searching for solutions. In this webinar, we will deal with how leaders can find and make sense of research knowledge as you work to understand existing problems and come up with evidence-based solutions. Our objectives today start with discussing what we mean by research and then talking about how you can tell whether research knowledge is trustworthy. In today's information age, the library is accessed via the internet. We will talk about how you go about finding good quality research on a given program, problem, or topic, the different kinds of research available to you, and how to decipher this research once you have it in hand. Ultimately, our goal is to help you learn how to use published work to balance your understanding of the causes and solutions to your instructional challenges and become a better advocate for your school improvement work by strengthening your efforts with research.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is David Brazer. So we begin with the question, why research? Who cares? I want to start by saying that Jim March and other organization and leadership theorists have compared leading large entities to piloting a sailboat without a rudder or driving a car on glare ice. Their point is that there is a great deal in organizations such as schools and school districts that leaders cannot control. Playing on this theme, we believe that using research to guide school improvement efforts is so fundamental to success that to leave research out of the process practically condemns the attempt to failure. Why? Because no one individual or group of well-meaning educators is likely to understand all of the important nuances of the problems they face and their root causes. And no highly skilled teachers and administrators have time to test multiple solution options. Consequently, it makes sense for instructional leaders like you to tap into the knowledge base we call research and learn from the dozens of researchers who have investigated instructional problems similar to those you are facing today. You are likely to learn something that will help to keep your school improvement car out of the ditch. Our model of instructional leadership displayed on this slide explains how research fits in. Leadership knowledge is developed from three major factors. Research, both action research and published research, helps the leader to develop a deeper understanding of schools, teachers, students, and learning problems. But the leader's learning should not happen in isolation, making collaboration an important part of developing knowledge. By working ideas through with others, the leader learns multiple perspectives and develops a sense of team around a specific problem. Both collaboration and using an organizational perspective apply craft knowledge, that is, what is known locally, to what is learned through research. Our shorthand for using an organizational perspective is the four frames from Bowman and Deal's book, Reframing Organization. We can understand a learning problem and teachers' and students' reactions to it from structural, human resources, political, and symbolic perspectives. In our model of instructional leadership, research, in addition to collaboration and an organizational perspective, informs the leadership actions listed in the rectangle in the middle. When research-informed leadership action goes well, we believe the three outcomes listed, school improvement, improved student achievement, and organizational learning, are more likely to occur.
So let's turn to the question, what is research? The term research tends to be used very loosely. This is particularly true in educational settings because of the No Child Left Behind Act's emphasis on research-based practice. Often, though, the term research is used based on opinion or common knowledge more than systematic inquiry. We want to define exactly what we mean by research so that we can all be on the same page. Our definition of research relevant to education is published essays, articles, and books that report the collection and analysis of data in the process of answering specific research questions. Research may be quantitative in nature, using numerical values to answer questions about what exists, Most of us are very familiar through answering surveys of this kind of research. A quantitative study may be as simple conceptually as testing whether or not an intervention is more effective than the status quo. Or it may be as complex as the famous Coleman report of the mid-1960s that set off decades of debate by claiming that family background factors are more important than school quality for predicting students' academic success. Generally, quantitative research involves statistical reasoning and analysis. Qualitative research asks different questions compared to quantitative. More concerned with how and why educational outcomes occur, qualitative researchers, as the name suggests, investigates the qualities of school phenomena through interviews, observations, document analysis, and other means. I'm sure many of you have been interviewed as a part of a research study or an evaluation study, and the difference is your opinions, your feelings, your perceptions are being probed, and you have an opportunity to answer based on those thoughts and feelings. Quantitative research tends to be honored in the media over qualitative research. Many feel that assigning a number to a thought or an idea is somehow more precise. We tend to take the perspective, though, that different kinds of research are suitable for answering different kinds of questions, and encourage you not to qualify or credential one type of research over another, but rather to seek research that fits the kinds of questions or purposes you have. An almost as important question as what is research is what research is not. Just because something is published, even if it is published in a reputable journal, doesn't mean that it is research. A great deal of what is published about education, especially in newspapers and popular magazines, is opinion that may be based on research, but is not itself research. We caution you to avoid relying on editorials or advocacy of one sort or another to support your thinking about school improvement. Sometimes ideas that appear logical or sensible are unfortunately wrong. The difficult reality is that we're easily seduced by ready-made solutions that appear logical and are claimed to be powerful. This often comes in the form of an article or an accounting of what worked in one school or what worked in another school. Research is seldom so cut and dried that a simple or definitive solution is apparent. Reading actual research is much more complicated than that, but it's a wise investment. Think about a balance for yourself. Read opinion pieces in books out of the self-help or what worked here genre to stimulate your thinking and to motivate yourself to learn more about the research that may have inspired these sources. One of our favorite books in this category is Stephen Covey's Principle-Centered Leadership, in which he takes his widely read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and applies those ideas to leading organizations. This book stimulates our thinking, but we move to research to learn how the world works and to inform our decisions. The model on your screen provides another way of seeing how research fits into school improvement processes. Research may inform collaborative problem diagnosis, the topic of our first webinar, particularly if a team is reading and discussing relevant research and drawing conclusions together. More so, research provides the raw material of root cause analysis and helps in identifying solutions to identified causes. In terms of root cause analysis, you may be able to determine some root causes by looking within your school, by conducting some action research yourselves. But more detailed or in-depth understanding and more objective analysis is likely to come from research authored by someone who doesn't have a stake in one root cause explanation or another. Research on the effectiveness of specific programs may provide fodder for selecting approaches that will work well in your school context. In other words, identifying solutions that are intended to remedy the causes you've identified. Action research occurs throughout the school improvement planning process because the focus is what is happening at the school. What we understand about research is applied to learning problems in the school, but also filtered by school experiences. Thus, what is learned from research is applied to solution development and action planning, the subject of our next webinar. When actions are implemented, the reflection and evaluation help explain what worked and what didn't work. These results are considered, and the problem diagnostic process begins again.
Up to now, we have been talking about research rather abstractly. We believe that your use of research should be very practically focused on the learning problem you are striving to address. Therefore, the first step in your use of research is to gain a deeper understanding of the learning problem you have observed. You can do this more effectively by stepping away from your school or district to learn what has been occurring in other places. As you read, you want to search for root causes of the problem by keeping in mind the question, why? As an example, consider language arts achievement in middle school. Maybe the problem you've decided to focus on is 7th grade students in poverty whose language arts achievement is substantially lower than the majority population in your school. The first thing you might find in the literature is that this is a common problem in middle school. Asking why this is occurring may help you to focus on key contributing factors that are revealed in the literature. Root causes may include high rates of transience among students in poverty that inhibited early literacy learning, few books in the home, parents whose literacy is not strong, and a lack of reading habits in the home. You might then reflect back on your own school and think about whether or not you've seen similar characteristics among your families in poverty. Thus, root causes that were not evident to you before come clearer as a result of your reading research. If you've been with us through the first two webinars, you know that we have deliberately held off talking about solutions because we believe that the problem needs to be thoroughly understood through action research at the school site and consulting published research before solutions can begin to make sense. While you're engaged with relevant literature, you will see that learning interventions have been tried and studied. This kind of research helps to give you some ideas about how your problem might be mitigated or eliminated. In other words, through reading research, you will learn about promising solutions. There are many challenges, however, in the process of uncovering research that is helpful to you. The strength of the Internet is also a curse. The wealth of information is unfiltered, bewildering, and sometimes misleading. An important way of sifting through all that is available to stay focused on research as we have already defined it. A different challenge, one that we hope to help you with today, is that research is generally written for researchers. Much as parents may experience our dialogues with them as full of jargon and unfamiliar acronyms, research has its own language and format, which may make technical papers hard to apply to your needs. There are three general types of research as depicted in this pyramid. Tertiary sources provide the most condensed form of what is known about a topic. They give the reader thumbnail sketches of specific topics and issues. Examples of tertiary sources include encyclopedias, trade journals, research briefs, and blogs and other websites. You want to be cautious to be sure you are getting tertiary sources that provide ample citations and references so that you know you are not reading something that is no more than one person's opinion. When you are just getting started with your pursuit of a particular topic of importance to your school, it might be best to start with a tertiary source such as a practical journal, similar to NAESP's Principal Magazine. Here you get the lay of the land on a topic and some references to get you started. This may lead you to secondary and primary sources that give you greater detail and refer you back to important theories that you may want to explore by mining the reference lists. Secondary sources include meta-analyses that organize a set of literature for the reader by taking a collection of related studies and analyzing their results. One of our current favorites was published by Robinson, Lloyd, and Rowe in 2008. Zeroing in on the debate about the effectiveness of transformational leadership and instructional leadership, the authors reanalyzed the data from 27 studies. This kind of work helps a student of leadership to understand relatively quickly what has been happening in the literature over the past 20 years or so. One of the fascinating results is that Robinson, Lloyd, and Rowe were able to isolate specific instructional leadership behaviors that appear to have the greatest impact on student learning, far greater than any transformational leadership behaviors. Other kinds of secondary sources are literature reviews and responses to specific research. Primary sources are based on actual data collection and analysis. After you have informed yourself with the help of secondary and tertiary sources, it is time to get into the real thing. Primary sources, those upon which you can base your approach to a specific instructional problem, provide the level of detail you need to understand four important aspects of the problem you wish to address. 1. The detailed nature of your problem. 2. The degree to which your problem is similar to and different from what is experienced in schools such as yours. 3. Root causes of your instructional problem. And 4. Promising solutions that may be used to address your problem. We would never try to mislead you and indicate that research articles will read like a crime novel. They are more likely to put you to sleep. But with perseverance comes learning and gratification. Think of primary sources as your own personal advisory committee, putting resources at your fingertips to help guide your thinking and decision-making. Consider how lucky you are to have virtually all of this help available to you on your computer screen, an issue we will get into in more detail later on. Although we greatly value published research, we do not want to leave you with the impression that it should be valued above what is known at your school site. We encourage you to filter what you can learn from research through what you know about your own school or district. This local understanding of educational challenges and values we call craft knowledge. You and your colleagues have learned a great deal through your careers, and the understanding you have gained is extremely valuable. Research cannot be applied to a learning problem exactly as it is presented. What is known from research must be adapted to what is known from experience, both individual teaching and learning experiences and experience of the local context.
The biggest change in research in the past, perhaps century, is depicted on the screen. When David and I were in graduate school, there was no internet. We searched hard copy databases, microfiche, microfilm. We got lost in the stacks. Even those terms seem quaint today. I know my children laugh at me when I use them. Everything that was once searched from musty, dusty shelves and drawers is now available on your laptop or any other internet-connected device. Everything being out there is a terrific opportunity, but you need to have a strategy for finding what you want. We have listed here 5 steps that will help you to find research literature that will then help you make a case for the problem you wish to address, identify root causes, and discover promising solutions to those problems that form your school improvement focus. The first step in the process is to identify a guiding question. A guiding question is a good place to begin your search. It focuses your thinking. Ask yourself, what do I want to learn about the student achievement problem I've identified in my school? Then create a specific question focused on your problem. For example, what kinds of experiences have other schools had with students reading below grade level, and how have they addressed this issue? Creating one or more guiding questions helps you to focus your collaborative team on the problem you have already identified. The question or questions explain to everyone involved what you want to learn from the research. As we have already implied, there are 2 basic kinds of information you are seeking in the literature. 1, a deeper understanding of the problem you have identified, largely to identify the root causes of the problem. And 2, solutions that, perhaps with some modification for your unique circumstances, show promise for reducing or eliminating the causes you've identified based on your analysis. Step 2 in your strategy is to identify keywords or to develop a keyword list. Because Internet search engines are driven by keywords, this is an important step that will allow you to filter the available resources that are out there and identify material that's targeted to your needs. Think about the question we talked about on the previous slide. Items that might make your keyword list might be high school, literacy, reading, language arts. Depending on the demographics and location of your school, you might also include terms such as poverty, second language acquisition, rural, urban, or suburban. As you're getting started, it makes sense to brainstorm as many keywords as possible to make your search more inclusive. You can sample sources that you find based on specific keywords to see if they're well-focused for your problem or not. The keywords that yield the most relevant sources are those that are of greatest value to you.
Could you talk again about the types of tertiary sources they might use for this?
Sure. Tertiary sources tend to be material that's available that is heavily synthesized or summarized. So very often popular materials that are available from associations, textbooks, research briefs are the kinds of things that fall into the category that I think about as tertiary sources. A bit more esoteric, there are encyclopedias of educational terms and programs that offer very basic information. It's heavily synthesized. The virtue of any of those sources is that they may point you in the direction toward primary sources that are of value to you. In other words, someone has already done some of the work of synthesizing material for you and then can point you in the direction of the original source material.
One thing I'd like to point out is that later on in the webinar, we will be discussing different kinds of databases to use. Many of the databases indicate what kind of sources you would be searching in. And so when you begin to explore, you will find that there are checkboxes you can check off to indicate that you're interested in getting material from tertiary sources or not. Maybe you only want primary sources.
And here's that slide that David promised. We've listed 4 different types of databases that are readily available to you no matter how you get into the Internet. Those of you affiliated with universities or have school districts that subscribe to research databases may be able to access information in different ways, but the types listed on the slide contain abundant resources and may be a good place to start. Nearly everyone is familiar with using search engines like Google. Google Scholar is a helpful, focused search engine that, as the name suggests, helps you find scholarship. It is possible to enter keywords into Google and to engage in advanced searches that will narrow down what you find, but you may find Google Scholar most effective for searching for a particular author's work or particular research topic. This is a good idea when you've read one source from an author or want to learn more about a particular author's work. Google Scholar also links you to articles that cited the one you already found and to related articles. Google Scholar is not a moderated site, and it's not reviewed or filtered. It is a powerful tool, but be prepared for thousands, if not millions, of hits. ERIC, an acronym for the Educational Resources Information Center, is another search engine that you may be familiar with based on your use in graduate school, most likely. We used to read ERIC documents on microfilm and microfiche. Now a great deal of the research in the ERIC database is available online in full text. ERIC will let you specify peer-reviewed publications, publication dates, educational levels, and other search parameters. ERIC contains a thesaurus of keywords as well. Hence, ERIC can help you identify keywords that are synonyms for or connect to those that you've identified initially. Also, ERIC is a moderated site. Submissions are reviewed, so in general, the hits you receive from ERIC may be more targeted to your needs. The third suggestion, the regional education labs, are federally funded research institutes spread out around the country. They serve specific regions and tend to focus their research there. The Regional Education Lab database can be searched in a manner similar to ERIC and Google Scholar. Similarly, there are specific content labs that focus on educational topics like assessment. These may offer more targeted resources for you. And finally, as we mentioned earlier, national associations such as NAESP publish valuable tertiary sources that can help you understand a general topic area in a very short period of time. These sources often yield valuable reference lists that can launch into finding helpful secondary and primary sources. Some of these materials are for members only, or for some sites, members have access to more or greater amounts of material, but generally there is a great deal of information available for general consumption on these sites. The next step in the process is to identify high prospect sources. So when you enter a keyword into an online database, you may get hundreds if not thousands of sources spit out from the database. You may need to limit your search. Two common ways of doing this are to designate peer-reviewed sources only, if that is an option in the database, and looking only at the past 5 or 10 years. Sometimes you don't get many hits, so if you need to change your keyword, add keywords, or open up the number of years in which you're searching in order to cast a broader net, that's pretty easy to do. As you find sources, you want to know which ones are worth reading. Start with titles and abstracts to determine which studies appear to be most related to your guiding question. This way you can narrow down what may have started out as dozens or hundreds of sources to the handful that are most promising for you to read carefully. This helps your task of learning what has been published to be much more manageable. Also note that search engines such as Google Scholar will retrieve for you hits on a rated basis. So hits that are closest to your keywords or seem most germane to your search term. Another reason why crafting those search terms carefully is extremely important. The last step in your search process, after you've read the best sources you've identified, is designed to help you understand what the literature is telling you by creating a diagram, a concept map, that describes how the various sources reinforce, contradict, or relate to one another. This slide contains a simple diagram that highlights key factors within 3 different events in the lives of high school students: transition into high school, potential bullying in the high school, and ultimately dropping out. We recognize this is overly simplified, but our intent is to encourage you to challenge yourself to put the literature you find together in new ways. This process helps you to digest what you've read and to figure out how to convey the important ideas. This work is critical to enlisting the assistance of your collaborative team, your administration, and others who have influence and power within your school and school system. Creating a conceptual map of the research you have found helps you to develop a rationale, a set of coherent arguments that supports addressing the problem you have identified and mitigating or eliminating its root causes by applying targeted solutions. When these ideas come from peer-reviewed research, they may carry more weight than if they're simply ideas you brainstormed one afternoon.
An ongoing theme of today's webinar is to be careful with the sources you find. If you are using websites in addition to traditionally published research, be sure to identify the authors of the website and check their credentials. We have more to say about source quality in the next slide. Here we present an important strategy for building confidence in the research you use. The most effective way to avoid being hoodwinked by information that appears credible but may not be is to engage in the process of triangulation. This somewhat fancy term simply means using multiple sources to verify a conclusion. If one author claims that vocabulary development among second language learners needs to occur during third grade math instruction, are there other authors who support this view? Are there nuances in the various arguments presented? What are the counter-arguments? What makes the most sense for your particular school or district? The research you read is intended to serve you, which is why we say that the most important criterion for research quality is its usefulness to you. If the research is not informing you about your student's learning problem, then it is not a good source for you and should be discarded. If, however, you find a source useful, then you want to hold it up to at least two other standards. The most important characteristic that separates bona fide research from other materials is the peer review process. When a research article is submitted to a journal for potential publication, the editors send blind copies out to respected researchers in the same or related fields. These blind reviewers make recommendations to the journal editor. Based on their feedback, an article may be rejected, sent back for revision and resubmission, or outright accepted. This is a quality control process intended to certify that any published article meets minimum standards for research credibility and verbal expression. Sometimes, a scholar has an idea for a book with a particular theme, and she invites other scholars to make contributions. Generally, such editors solicit contributions from scholars they know or who have strong reputations. The standards for publication are not at the same level as blind review, but the editor is concerned about her reputation and must persuade a publisher to publish the book. Knowing whether an edited volume is of good quality is related in part to the reputations of the authors whose work appears in it, a topic we'll take up in a moment. Another measure of source reliability, especially for edited volumes, is looking at who is publishing it. Certain publishing houses, such as Harvard University Press, Teachers College Press, or Sage Publications, have international reputations that they protect quite vigorously. Less well-known, smaller publishing houses may be hungrier for manuscripts and therefore not as discriminating in what they choose to publish. As we have suggested, the reputations of authors are an important indicator of research reliability and quality. It may be difficult for you to know if a particular scholar is well respected, but there is an easy way to get at least a rough measure. If you find an article that catches your eye by someone you may never have heard of, Lee Shulman, for example, then you can use Google Scholar to find out what others think of the person's work, what other people think of this person's work generally, and of the article you found specifically. If you go to googlescholar.com, simply enter the author's name in the search bar, and in less than 1 or 2 seconds you will have a list of that author's publications. More important, each publication will have an indicator for how many times it has been cited by other scholars in published work. You can find the article that interested you and see if others found it to be important enough to cite. Even better, you can click on the citations link and see what these authors have published. Thus, while you are checking the reputation of one author, you are finding additional related research. By the way, if you enter Lee Shulman into Google Scholar, you will find that the articles listed on just his first page have been cited tens of thousands of times. He has been an important contributor to education research for about 40 years. One last rough measure of reliability and quality is the author's affiliation. If the author is a professor at a top research institution, or a researcher at one of the regional research labs, or at a private nonprofit such as the American Institute for Research, then you know that peers have judged the person to be worthy of conducting research. Authors without such an affiliation are more suspect, but their reputations are enhanced by the venues in which they publish. Additional factors that indicate to you the usefulness of a particular publication include its currency. Some publications are timeless, but many are dated by the fact that the needs of children in schools change, and so do expectations from the public. This is why we use the past 10 years as an initial window for your search. If you go back many more years than that, you may find that the relevance of the research you find diminishes. Check for the intent of the publication you are reading. Is it making a pitch for a particular interpretation of a problem or a specific intervention? Is the source advocating a set of actions based on a political position, or perhaps in an effort to sell an intervention? We have spent a great deal of time discussing research in general terms. This slide lays out each of the major pieces of a typical peer-reviewed journal article. We explain each of these in detail on the subsequent slides. The introductory portion of any article, often referred to as the statement of the problem, explains the purpose, or what the authors intended to learn from their research. Another key element is significance, what is new, different, and/or important about this research. Near the end of this statement of the problem section, you will often find research questions and/or research hypotheses. This section is critical to determining your interest in the article. If the author's purpose is aligned with what you want to learn about the learning problem in your school, then this is likely to be an article you want to read carefully. The next section is typically a review of literature that explains the perspective the authors used to conduct their research. Using past research to build a foundation, the authors will demonstrate which variables or circumstances they found important to study and why. The best framework sections create a dynamic model that demonstrates what is likely to happen under specific circumstances.
Now we move on to the section that we love to skip, methods. The methods section gives you important information about how similar or different the student population in the study is compared to the one with which you're working. The details can be tedious, but they're important. Furthermore, you'll want to know how data were collected and analyzed so that you get some sense of the trustworthiness of the research. Evaluation is a topic we'll address in the next webinar, but here we want to point out that the learning from different research methodologies from research articles can give you some clues about how you can collect and analyze data generated in your own school by conducting the action research you need to conduct on your own initiatives to guide your future school improvement efforts. We're just going to touch on statistics for just one moment. Just one word about asterisks. If you've ever tried to decipher the statistical tables in a research paper, you know why I'm picking on the asterisk. Many studies of interest to educators, especially those about interventions or program efficacy, seek to answer the question of whether a program made a difference. That is, whether the post-test of achievement is greater than the pre-test. The problem is, as any statistician will tell you, variability happens in the real world. So if I measured a class's understanding at 2 points in time, even assuming that I could put each student in a bubble in the intervening period, performance would not be identical at both points in time. Researchers use inferential statistics to determine if a difference is statistically meaningful, or to use the correct terminology, statistically significant. A significant difference is normally designated with 1 or 2 asterisks, signifying different degrees of confidence in the assertion that the difference is truly non-zero. I don't want to put you through a full stats lesson, but it's important to note that statistical significance is very sensitive to sample size, such that if a study includes a large sample, fairly small differences are likely to appear meaningful. An alternative statistic, called an effect size, is used to help clarify what we call practical significance. What's nice about effect sizes is that there are conventions that suggest what a small, medium, or large effect would be that can really help you in your interpretation of whether a program or an initiative truly made a difference. The 2 sections that fill out the rest of a typical research article provide the plot and the punchline of the research. Findings, as the term suggests, explains what the authors learned based on their methodology and how they interpreted the data through their conceptual framework. A finding might be that students who experienced a whole language intervention performed better on writing tasks than students who experienced a phonics intervention. What these findings actually mean for classroom teachers, principals, or superintendents is presented in the discussion or concluding section. Finally, no study is perfect. Authors will discuss the meaningful limitations of their study to explain to the reader where some of the findings might be suspect or missing and why, and to suggest new directions for future research.
When you have informed yourself with research, you are ready to engage your collaborative team in the action planning process. As you do so, your theory of action, that is, what you believe will happen as a result of making changes in teaching and learning processes, will become clear. This theory of action is the main rationale behind the change you intend to make in your school or district. What we have done in today's webinar is to bring us all the way up to the point of implementation. We think of implementation as action planning, executing the action plan, and evaluating the results of the action plan. As you think about what research is telling you and what you know about your school and get ready to engage in the action planning process, there are some important questions to consider. Were the stakeholders who will be most effective involved in your discussions, and therefore do they have a similar understanding of the nature of the problem, its root causes, and promising solutions? What kinds of rules or roles already exist in your school or district and may be obstacles to making change? Can they be changed, or are they sacred cows in some way that keep them in place? And finally, what does the culture in your school or district look like? Will it actually support change? And this concludes our presentation portion of the webinar.
Okay, with that, I will thank you both for this information, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.